Drivers have risen to fame like Austria's Jochen Rindt. A stubborn and determined driver, he was blessed with superb car control. As he moved closer to World Championship success, the risks he had to take increased as the cars became more fragile. With Rindt's widow Nina, Autofiles tells the story of his rise through the ranks. From the first two races he drove in England, at Mallory Park and Crystal Palace in 1964 in a Formula 2 Brabham, it was obvious that here was a major talent on the world stage. Jackie Stewart was on that world stage too. John Surtees was to become world champion in 1964. Graham Hill had been in 1962 and so had Clark in '63. Nina Rindt remembers meeting Jochen for the first time in their home country of Austria.
We met in 1963 in Zürich. It's an Austrian ski resort. And I said to my father, look, there's this Austrian driver we saw this summer. He said, no, racing drivers don't ski. I said, yes, it was him. And we went to look for him in the evening and we found him. And they were talking about gear ratios and cars and races and what do you do next year. And suddenly they said, oh, by the way, this is my daughter. Oh, you have a daughter? Are you free tonight? So that was the start.
Continuing his Formula 2 success, Jochen signed with Cooper for Grand Prix racing. However, his first major victory was to come in a sports car, a Ferrari 250 LM, in the 1965 Le Mans 24-hour race. The race was expected to be a battle between the works Ferraris and the new Ford GTs. If anyone was disappointed in the early stages of the race, it was Maston Gregory, Rindt's American co-driver. He heard a peculiar noise at the back of the car. Maston and Jochen decided to drive the car flat out. It was never going to last, and then they could go home early. However, the cars that didn't last were the Fords and the works Ferraris. Soldiering on, the 250 LM went on to win at Le Mans, an amazing victory. When Jochen joined Cooper in 1965, the team was overseen by John Cooper. In 1966, there was a new team manager, experienced former driver and Le Mans winner, Roy Salvadori. Salvadori was the architect of the takeover of Cooper cars by Jonathan Seif. Although Salvadori was a successful Grand Prix and sports car driver, he was also a very shrewd businessman, and he never confused the two throughout his racing career. Coming to Cooper as their team manager, he was determined to be successful, and his approach was highly motivated. He'd driven for many teams and knew exactly what was required of a team to win, and it made for a pretty fiery relationship between Salvadori on one side and Rindt on the other. Very stubborn and not wanting to be told how to drive the car, a trait of most self-centered racing drivers. The final year of the 1.5-litre Formula in 1965 was a year that Cooper would rather forget. Their cars weren't competitive, and Bruce McLaren was well on his way to starting his own team. An experienced hand, perhaps lacking the complete ruthlessness to be world champion himself, McLaren had decided that manufacturing cars would be the better way for him to go about it. Rindt could have learned from him if he'd wanted to, but Jochen wasn't keen on learning from anybody. He wanted to do things his way and never hesitated to tell everybody so. Despite this, he got on well with McLaren. They became friends, and the same applied to Salvadori too.
They finished up very good friends. They had a lot of arguments. But they played a lot of cards together, and Jochen was a very impatient person. He wouldn't listen to anything. He wanted it his way, and that was it. And he wanted it now. He would not listen to anything.
The battles that Roy Salvadori had with Jochen Rindt were as good as any that occurred out on the track.
No. He used to fly off the handle, so did I, but that was all. It would all sort of hang itself together, and he would do his job and I would do mine. He felt he wasn't getting the right car. He felt he wasn't getting the right deal, but that was Jochen. After that, he'd get in the car and drive like hell, and he was a super driver, very hard on the car, but a potential world champion.
Of a similar age to Jackie Stewart, they soon struck up a friendship and lived near each other in Switzerland. Established stars like Brabham, Hill and Clark were just that little bit older, but both the younger drivers were anxious to make their mark. Grand Prix winner Innes Ireland drove against both of them.
I drove against Jackie. Oh yes, and once or twice possibly against Jochen. Jochen took some bloody stupid chances. He wasn't. Jackie was a much better driver than Jochen. Jochen did do some bloody daft things, you know, and it was only through other people's getting out of the way, just seeing the accident coming, that Jochen didn't have, you know, one or two fairly serious accidents early in his Formula One career.
The big, if somewhat heavy, Maserati V12 engine in the back of the new Cooper, which was driven by Richie Ginther in the early races alongside Jochen. It was clear that Jochen was setting the pace. Early in the season, Jack Brabham had taken the lead in the World Championship with the comparatively simple, uncomplicated Repco Brabham. At Silverstone in the International Trophy, he was to win again, leaving Coopers, who had a huge party arranged to celebrate their victory, feeling a bit lost. The drama of the season came when, after winning the Belgian Grand Prix and taking the lead in the World Championship, John Surtees abruptly left Ferrari.
I didn't have anywhere else to go, and this was mid-season, and I was leading the World Championship. But Mr. Ferrari was in a very political position. He was deeply involved now with Fiat. Dragoni was deeply involved in those negotiations. And so it ended up I went. And of course I joined my old teammate, Roy Salvadori. And in fact, I moved virtually just down the road, and there I was working away at Maserati to try and get their engine better. And I joined Jochen Rindt in the Cooper team for the rest of the season. I'd had a little of a dice with Jochen Rindt at the Belgian Grand Prix. And I'd won that, and Jochen had been second. And it was quite pleasing, actually, to go and take Jochen on first hand in the same team, because Dragoni had been saying that Jochen was, after my injuries, faster than I was. But of course this was disproved because I went to the same team and I was always faster than Jochen.
In their first race together as teammates, the French Grand Prix, Surtees retired but Rindt went on to fourth place, adding to his second in the Belgian Grand Prix. In one respect, there was a great similarity between John Surtees and Jochen Rindt. Neither took advice willingly, preferring to find his own way. The win to Jack Brabham. The British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch on a wet day, and the Coopers were having a difficult time. Conditions suited the Brabham team perfectly. Jim Clark had the 2-litre Coventry Climax-engined Lotus, but struggled to keep up. In the changeable conditions, Rindt brought the Cooper home in 5th place, but it was a long, hard battle. Prix at the Nürburgring was run in wet weather too. Jochen Rindt finished third behind Jack Brabham. There was a win for Coopers at the end of the year when Surtees won the Mexican Grand Prix. The 1967 season saw the new Lotus 49 fitted with the most powerful engine in Grand Prix racing of the day, and it often led races courtesy of Clark or Hill, but sometimes it didn't win them. The cars were not yet 100% reliable. Behind it was Denny Hulme and Jack Brabham giving chase. Jochen Rindt made a big effort to improve Cooper's fortunes. However, the famous Cooper team that had helped change Grand Prix racing with their rear-engined innovation was soon to fall by the wayside as the descendant of the 1950s Maserati engine lost its competitiveness. Through his friendship with Roy Salvadori, former Connaught team owner Bernie Eccleston returned to motor racing and became Jochen Rindt's manager. Salvadori felt that a Ford engine was required, but the team owners were anxious to maintain their contacts with BMC, who badged the Mini Cooper. A modified Maserati engine was fitted to a new, lighter Cooper at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix. Jochen didn't seem very pleased with the car, but hurled it around with his usual determination. Ahead of him were the Brabhams and the Lotus 49s. Joe Siffert in the Rob Walker car was also finding difficulty in keeping the Cooper competitive anymore. By the time Coopers arrived at the German Grand Prix at Nürburgring, Jochen had finished only once during the season, the fourth place in the Belgian Grand Prix. The Coopers were just too unreliable. The Italian Grand Prix at Monza saw a fourth place for Jochen, his equal best finish of the year. As Lotus showed their superiority late in the season at the US Grand Prix, Jochen left the ailing Cooper and joined Jack Brabham's team, fresh from winning the 1967 championship. Repco had built a twin-cam engine similar to the Ford DFV. How did Jochen Rindt get on with Sir Jack Brabham?
Oh, he loved Jack. They had a very good relationship, definitely. And he was very disappointed, I think, Jochen, that it didn't work out so well. He had hoped very much that it was going to work out, but it didn't.
Well, 1968 was a bad year for us, really, because Repco decided they'd build a twin-cam engine similar to the Cosworth, and that engine didn't turn out anywhere near as successful as the first one. We had a few problems in the engine, mainly with a torsional crankshaft problem, which went through the engine. And by the end of that year, Repco decided they didn't want to go any further with it because it was starting to cost too much money and motor racing was starting to escalate. And the Ford Cosworth had come on the scene, and of course that was, I don't have to tell you how successful that engine was. And the following year, in '69, we switched to the Ford Cosworth engine ourselves.
Repco had earned a tremendous reputation in 1966 and '67 with 2 World Championship victories with their engines, but the new design proved fast but fragile. What went wrong was very serious indeed. The car only managed 2 third places during the year in Jochen's hands, retiring in every other race. Despite this, it handled superbly, and Jochen got on well with both Brabham and chief designer Ron Turenak, but he received an offer he couldn't dismiss from Colin Chapman of Lotus.
Rindt told us when we were in Mexico at the last race of the previous season of this offer he'd had from Colin, and he didn't want to go. And in fact, he said, look, I'll drive for you for half the money if I want to stay. But We weren't into getting sponsorship in those days. It was quite a... In fact, I've never been into getting sponsorship. It's a different way of life, and I am not used to it.
Tauranac is convinced that had Rindt stayed with Brabham, he could have won the World Championship.
Oh yes, there's no doubt about that.
He was very reluctant to go to Lotus, basically because of all the bad history of the cars and Colin and so forth. They said it's the car and he wants to try it.
By 1969, the Lotus 49 was a 2-year-old design, and aerodynamics in motorsport had changed completely. The addition of wings, front and rear, had put stresses on the car for which it wasn't designed, and it was constantly being beefed up. Colin Chapman had gone down the 4-wheel drive route, but it turned out to be unsuccessful. Lotus had actually sold their 49s and had to buy them back to keep racing. All this could have made the team unhappy, because despite trying as hard as they could, both Graham Hill and Jochen Rindt were not having a good season. There was an age difference between the two drivers, and Hill was the reigning champion. Jochen was impatient, but the two got on well together. They were evenly matched. Graham scored his 5th and final win at Monaco, and Jochen's late-season Grand Prix win, his maiden victory, was in the USA. But the season was spoilt by a huge accident for Graham in the same race.
No, I never, ever did they had any sort of serious arguments. It was always ended up in laughing. Never, ever. We always had sort of a good relationship with Graham. Jochen understood him, Graham understood Jochen, they had a sort of respect for each other. They had a good relationship.
Comparing him with Jackie Stewart, did Nina notice any difference in their approach to the demands of Grand Prix racing?
Jackie had much more patience, much more diplomatic person, could take people much better. Jochen just either liked people or didn't like them and told them what he thought, and that was it.
It was becoming clear that though they were close friends off the track, Stewart and Rindt were very serious rivals on it. The British Grand Prix at Silverstone in 1969 was a tremendous race between the two, the win going to Stewart in the Matra as he accelerated towards the first of his 3 World Championships. It's fair to say that Jochen was rarely at ease in the Lotus team and had not developed a close relationship with Colin Chapman.
Not terribly. I was driving the Lotus 49, which he liked very much. I think the one Graham had been driving. And the fact was that he won a few races, the 49, and he sort of insisted on keep driving the 49 till they had established that the Lotus 72 was safer than he thought it was, because what was his name?
John Miles.
John Miles had an accident, and Jochen had an accident, and they didn't regard the car completely safe. So they had lots of arguments and discussions with Colin, and Colin was always having his own way. Never got anywhere with Colin. Colin was like a brick wall. You couldn't speak to him.
Monaco in 1970, and Jochen's preference for the old 49 paid off here when Brabham outbraked himself at the hairpin and Rindt came through to win.
I was leading right up to the last lap, and Piers' carriage had run out of petrol just before the last corner, and it was just one of those decisions. I took the wrong decision, went down on the inside of him instead of the outside of him, and of course all the sand was on the inside, and I just couldn't stop for the corner, and Rindt got by me for the lead.
In the pits at Spa, Nina watches Jochen prepare for the Belgian Grand Prix. He'd already discarded the new wedge-shaped Lotus 72 in favour of the older 49. He'd only driven the 72 once, at Jarama in Spain, and he didn't like it. He was to retire again, and this was his last race with the old 49.
We were all very close friends, yes. I had Helen and Sally Courage, close friends, and no, we had a great time. It was like a circus moving around the world, and we just went to one party after another. We never really thought about danger or anything like that.
But danger was ever present at the wheel of the 72. With the car now sorted out, Jochen won the Dutch Grand Prix, but his friend Pierre's courage lost his life. In the French Grand Prix at Clermont-Ferrand, Jochen proved his speed by finishing first, despite feeling ill. Then came the British Grand Prix, held in those days at Brands Hatch. It appeared all was lost when Jack Brabham returned to form. He'd won the first Grand Prix of the season in South Africa. On the last lap, Brabham ran out of petrol. Rindt won, and Brabham crawled across the line in second. Rindt had to overcome an official inquiry into the legality of the wings on his Lotus before he could claim his victory.
Rindt and I had a terrific dice at Brands Hatch at the British Grand Prix, and I managed to get the better of him with 10 laps to go. And on the last lap, the car ran out of petrol in the last corner. And I rolled over the line second again.
The Lotus 72 was beginning to fulfill its potential.
Yes, it did, yes. But then again they had accidents with the car. And then Monza came up, and Jochen insisted that he will only drive the 49 in Monza. And we got to Monza, and the 49 wasn't there. And Colin says, well, either you drive the 72 or you don't have to drive at all.
Rindt won the German Grand Prix, so he led the championship going into the Italian Grand Prix. Sadly, in practice for the race, Jochen crashed fatally.
Anyone who loves motor racing, they're prepared in a sort of way, in my opinion, to die. If, you know, they know it can happen. You can't really blame anybody. Pierce died that same summer, Jochen died, and he said he was going to go in another year. Definitely.
He became Formula One's first, and thankfully only, posthumous world champion.